Are you looking for inspiring conversations about faith, film, and life? You're in the right place. Here's the host who knows the right questions to ask, Father Edward Looney.
Hey everybody, it's Father Edward Looney here, and grateful to be having another conversation. Thank you for tuning in week after week. And a lot of times I speak with different authors, and today's guest is actually an author as well. But sometimes we talk about various topics related to faith or ordinary life. And a lot of times what happens too is I'll see something on social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or X, and I'm like, I want to talk to that person more about that. And that's how I got today's interview. And today I'm speaking with John Herreid. He is a graphic designer, an illustrator, a Catholic dad, an editor of the Catholic Home Gallery, which is available from Ignatius Press. And I found a post of his on social media and it went viral. And his post basically said, and then I went back and I searched, but his post said, at least I went viral for something good today. And so I'm like, oh, well, what was the viral post? And I go down and I find the post. And essentially, he started a thread. It said, I got this somewhat battered book for $1 at the thrift store. What was inside surprised me. So a little bit of intrigue. And then it went on in multi threads, different posts and images and such. And I'll let him share what he found for $1 at the thrift store that allowed him to be on a lot of people's feeds. So thank you so much, John, for taking time to have this conversation.
Thanks, Father Edward. Yeah, I'm kind of a thrifter. So what I found there is it's a sketchbook. So I'm holding up here. People who get the video of this podcast, they can see that. And I bookmarked some of the pages that are more striking, but you can tell from looking at this book that it is a sketchbook by somebody who's definitely a professional working artist. The style to me says mid-century, like 1950s, 1960s, very strong compositional style, and very, as I was saying to an artist friend, it's very unromantic. You can tell that whoever's working in this, they're doing it in a workmanlike way. They're trying to figure out what's the best composition for an illustration or a painting. A few of the paintings have notes next to them, and you can tell that this may have been the name of the person they're doing a commission for or something. And then some of them, there's even a couple of color studies here, which are of lighthouses. And pretty much all of these seem to be rural New England, and I'm guessing the coast of Maine. Yeah, it's as somebody who does work in art and stuff, it's very cool to see other people's working process. So here's another spread here, the seagull compositions, and you can see how he's decided how to have the silhouette of a seagull. Either in this one on the bottom, you got the detail is on the lighthouse, and the seagull is just a silhouette. And then you can see he's tried this alternate one up here, where the seagull is detailed and it's a sort of hazy background. So these are all, definitely an artist working through ideas, trying to figure out what he wants to do. And it gives you a glimpse into their mind as to what they're thinking. There's also some of these great woodsy things. They kind of remind me a bit of Calvin and Hobbes, the way that Bill Watterson drew woods. But there's no name in here. There is a bit of residue from what looks like there was something affixed at the back. At the front, which probably would have been a nameplate, but that's long gone. But yeah, it was a real surprise to stumble upon. It was on the shelf, and I picked it up and opened it up, and it was, wow, that's didn't expect to see that in there.
Yeah, so you were at a thrift store. So, where I come from, that might be a St. Vincent de Paul, that might be a Goodwill, it could be a Savers. So, probably one of those genres of thrift stores. And so it was just in the book section. Is that where you found it? And then what made you pull that book off? Because obviously we saw the cover of it. There's nothing on the cover, so maybe that's the intrigue there. Like, what could this be? And so you open it up, but what compelled you to pull it off the shelf and open it?
Actually, what compelled me is it wasn't in the book section. It was next to it was on the shelf with sort of the knickknacks and odds and ends, that sort of thing. And it was like a colander or something on top of it. And I was like, why is there a book over here? It should be in the book section. So
Yeah. And you're an artist yourself, so I think that's probably another reason. Obviously, when you picked it up, didn't know what it was, but that's the reason why you were so enthused about it, because you could understand the process that this person, this artist, man or woman, what he or she would have went through in creating the art that they ended up creating. So yeah, how do you approach this sketchbook then from the eyes of an artist as you are?
well, a lot of people kind of envision art as being sort of brief moments of divine inspiration, almost like where you just sit down and you come out with it. And it's not like that. You sit down and you hash ideas out. You do little thumbnails, you do, half done sketches and things like that. And that's what's in this. So I noticed some people commenting it on Twitter or X were saying this doesn't look like they were very skilled artists. These are really, not very complete. It's like, well, we've become accustomed on social media to often see people's really beautiful sketchbooks but they're clearly making those for the consumption of people on social media or something, where they're showing off their artwork in a sketchbook, but all the sketches in it look almost immaculate. This is somebody who is, they're hashing out ideas. They're coming up with compositions. It looks not that far off from when I'm trying to come up with a book cover design, because I will sketch out dozens of ideas, little thumbnails, and they often look extremely abstract, even more abstract than these drawings.
Hmm.
Often it'll just be like a series of circles and and whatnot. So
Yeah, as a writer, I guess I could relate to this in the sense that it's akin to, writing your first draft, revisiting the copy and making your own edits, looking at the edits of a copy editor. Like there's a process to everything. And so this artist was going through this process, and sketching is the first part before they go to the canvas. So to kind of perfect what they want to put on the canvas. So I guess that kind of makes sense. Why this sketchbook then would exist. So probably, do you think it was an artist maybe died, a family member? Because a lot of times at these thrift stores, it's people unloading stuff from a deceased loved one. So do
mhm.
you have like a story in your mind that you've kind of written about where this book came from, who could have done it? Like, is this just unloading an artist who has passed? And, yeah, I guess what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think everybody, when they find something like this, they want it to be somebody who's a known
Mm.
exciting name or something like that. I don't think it's somebody like that. I think it's somebody who was either an illustrator or an sort of mid-range working artist who did a lot of work. I don't know, did it come from somebody who was one of their students, maybe? Sometimes art teachers, artists who teach, sometimes they will hand off old sketchbooks and say, here's some examples of how you do compositions and thumbnails. Um, Most people I know who are artists, that you kind of got the division between the people who are pack rats and they save everything, and then the people who are completely unromantic about any of their past work and they just kind of chuck it. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this was somebody who was of the unromantic sort. Just looking at the drawings, they look, like I said before, very workmanlike. It looks like somebody who is confident in their talent and working out these compositions, but they're also, they're doing this in a sort of job-like manner.
So you bought this then for a buck, and so obviously not everybody's gonna go to the thrift store, find something like this, put it in their cart. Only a person who can really appreciate it, and you were that person. But then you took the picture and you made that post on X, and then you made the thread, And then did you kind of just wake up to the fact that you had a million impressions on this? What was that like, I guess, when you found out that this kind of went viral?
It was interesting because I post things on Instagram as well as I have a Facebook page that I run called JR's Art Place. And I posted the same content both of those places, and there was some interest, but it was not overwhelming. And then seeing the incredible response on Twitter was just sort of it took I was not sure exactly why it was getting so much traction. Um, it was interesting. I think a lot of people have an interest in like what if I found something really cool? What if I go to a garage sale or a thrift store and I find something exciting? And I think that's also part of the element why people were naming various well-known artists as like this could be the work of so and so, it could be work of so and so. They have the kind of wishful thought of like, what if I found a hidden masterpiece somewhere? So
Do you think that the identity of the artist might be discovered by you? Do you think someone could come forward and you could verify that, or what do you think? I know this is just hypothetical, but
yeah.
it's possible that maybe 3.9 million or whatever it was. That's a big number of people and impressions, and surely somebody might know who this was.
Yeah, it's always a possibility. I think if somebody's going to identify it, they'd probably want to look at the entire thing, see all the different notes, because there's notes in there that seem to be place names or names of clients and other things that are noted in there, but there's no artist name. And I tried Googling some of the place names and some of the other names, and I kind of came up with nothing really. The style is to me, like I said before, it looks very mid-century. So there isn't enough in the style, at least from these thumbnails, for me to say, oh, that looks like so and so. It and people threw out some names on Twitter that I could look up, and I looked up some of those, their name plus sketch, and their sketches don't look anything like these. Some of their finished paintings look similar composition wise, but their sketches don't look like this.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, because I think even with famous artists, there are books out there where you can kind of follow the progression of how they made whatever artwork piece it was, like Federico Barocci, for example. Like I know that I've seen kind of the progression of some of his drawings. So yeah, I guess that's one of the ways that you then kind of with the skilled eye, someone says something, you look up the sketch and you're like, no, that's not it, because we're only judging it based on the final product rather than kind of thinking about the preliminary stages which you're looking at.
Yeah, and I have identified artists of different pieces that I've picked up before. Um, so I have done that in the past. Like I've picked up at an estate auction a painting, well, pastel by an artist. I bought it just because I liked the look of it, and then I was able to identify the artist later. But yeah, it takes a little bit of legwork, a little bit of looking around online, but it's not too hard when you're working with a finished artwork. With sketches, it's a lot harder.
Sure. Yeah, I can appreciate the fact that you as an artist picked this up and took it and gave it a home. And I don't know what the lifespan of it in your possession is going to be or what you're going to do with it next. But I know for me, I went to an antique store just literally 3 blocks from my rectory. And I was just kind of browsing, looking around. I'm a priest, of course. And so looking at different religious things that interested in. And sometimes I think I'm a rescuer. Like, here's a statue of Saint Joseph that nobody will appreciate. So I'll put it in the cart and I'll pick it up. But as I was going through, I ended up finding this large picture frame. And if people are familiar with seminaries, typically what will happen is they'll have the rector, the bishop, and then they'll have all of the class. And so it was a class photo. And, it was an antique. It was from the early 1900s. You could tell that by who the bishop was. And I'm like, you know what? Nobody is going to appreciate this. And so why don't I take this and I will
Mhm.
appreciate it. And so I hung it up actually in my garage um, for the time being. And I actually had some seminarians from the Milwaukee Archdiocese who were helping a priest from Green Bay move out of my rectory who had stuff in storage. And so they were like mesmerized by this. And of course, they go to school down at St. Francis, and they probably have seen the original, and this would have been a duplication, but just the fact that I could appreciate this and realizing someone else couldn't. So I think that's kind of the value. Like when you or I go to the thrift store, our interests are going to be different, and we're going to uncover something that is of great interest to us.
Yeah, I mean, the also what I often will do is I'll look around on estate auction sites, websites online, and but antique stores are also great for that. The about 6 months or so, I went to an antique store on a trip, and I picked this up, which this is a mid-century Chinese Catholic
Oh,
depiction of the Nativity.
oh, wow.
Uh, Along with that, there was a matching print, which I didn't bring in here, but that was of the washing of the feet. So these were popularly produced in the 1940s and 50s as part of Catholic evangelization in China, and they depict the saints and Our Lady and Jesus and Saint Joseph in traditional Chinese garments.
Well, that's interesting. And I know too, like um, speaking about different religious images, at least, um, there's a style of image that was popular, and I don't know the year or the time frame, maybe the 1940s, probably early 1900s, but it's kind of a big, long, rectangular frame. And someone gave me, their grandparents had this image of Mary, and she was surrounded by angels, and she was holding the child Jesus, and they're like, I think my grandma would appreciate you having this. And so like they gave it to me. And then, I've been going to somebody's house for years, and they had a very similar style, kind of rectangular Holy Family, of probably the flight into Egypt or something like that. And then I know in one of my other parishes that I've served in, they had a very similar rectangular Jesus praying on the mount or something like that. So it's interesting kind of to look at how art kind of evolves, but then where we've been and how it has, as you've said, been used for evangelization. I'm sure that these pictures that I've acquired probably were images that people were picking up uh, that were being used, like put holy images in your house. And so that was the image of the time. And now today, put holy images in your house. Well, they're looking at your book that you compiled for Ignatius Press, that you have some of the prints behind you.
Yeah,
And it's called the Catholic Home Gallery. And so you're helping people put religious art in their homes too. So um it's just art is a beautiful thing and a great holy reminder, makes us think of the heavenly. What's the value that you see in the religious artwork that you've promoted and that you've observed throughout the century?
well, our imagination gets formed by what we look at, and so that can be good and that can be bad. For example, like a lot of people I talk to, they have a hard time imagining the Lord of the Rings aside from the Peter Jackson movies, which are great movies, but that gets into your head and then that's your image of it. So I think one of the things that is great is getting a diversity of images in your home depicting, like, here's a Gothic style Christ, here's a modern Christ, here's a Christ depicted in a manner that he's not a white European. Here's, once you start seeing a fuller sense of all of these images, it really can start firing on your imagination. And that's what I kind of hope that my children will come up with that. Another good example that there's an Episcopalian iconographer. He passed away about 20 years ago, named Alan Rowan Cright. He was a Black Episcopalian, marvelous artist, and I've found some of his stuff online being sold on eBay. So I picked some of those up. They're originally done for their bulletins, but his
Hmm.
work is absolutely beautiful, and it's very traditional, while at the same time he occasionally will depict the Holy Family or the Madonna as a Black woman or a Black family. Of course, he was Black himself, but it's one of those things that I've got a number of these up in my house now, in the living room, in the dining room by him. And they're beautiful little lithographs. He did them for church bulletins, as I said. So it's kind of amazing to think of him creating these, month in, month out. This is the Word became flesh,
Oh,
showing
wow.
Mary
And
as the
some Maria
modern.
Lochtons too.
Yeah, so she's feeding the baby Jesus, and she's obviously living in sort of a poor part of town. He was in Boston, so a lot of his stuff is very urban settings, and he often will have depictions of like Christ walking through the streets carrying his cross, and everyone's ignoring him,
Mm.
or Our Lady sitting on a bus and people are giving her the stink eye because she's holding a baby, things like that. So he was really very good at trying to hammer home that these are eternal things. These are things that are happening now. These are things that we have to be confronted with.
So you and I think we could maybe say we're collectors of items and things, So you're collecting a lot of different art pieces and such. So do you frame them? Do you put them up? Do you rotate them? Because, I find that I have a lot of stuff in storage, in the basement in a Rubbermaid container or something like that. And I don't really rotate them ever. So, like, what's your recommendation when you accumulate, when you acquire? How do you better appreciate the things so they just don't end up in your basement in a box?
Well, one thing I do often when I'm going to thrift stores again is I get frames, and I frame most of my stuff myself. So these prints from the Catholic Home Gallery behind me, I framed all of those with thrift store frames. Uh, I also have in my living room a picture rail system. So that is where there's a rail at the top of the wall and hooks that hang down. So you can rotate things in and out without having to put another hole in the wall. So that
Oh, yeah.
has been a big thing for me. There are, I mean, right now I have probably at least a dozen works of art that I need to frame. Um, Probably the biggest one is this one right behind me. This is one that I got at an estate sale, and it's from the Art Institute of Chicago circa, I think, the 1940s. But it's a print that they have of the Man of Sorrows,
Oh, wow.
and it's beautiful, based on a woodcut. It's a lithograph where they managed to duplicate all of the original colors very, very closely. So the workmanship on it is incredible, but I haven't gotten it framed yet, so it's not up in the house. And but yeah, like I was saying before, I like to try to get a really broad variety of styles, broad variety of themes too. Like I don't just have religious art in the house. I have other types of art. But if you keep an eye open, you can find incredible things. In my uh, dining room, there's a bay window, and in that there's a very large Madonna and Child that was sculpted by an Ohio sculptor named Irwin Frey. And that dates back to the 1920s, and I got that at an estate auction for $8. So oftentimes people, if it's not a name that everybody knows, like nobody, Irwin Frey, he's not a super well-known artist. But if you see an artist out there that when you're looking around, like the one I was just showing, Alan Rowan Crite, and you keep that name in your head and you see something from them on auction online, and you want to keep within your budget. Like I got a bunch of his prints for $40. That is very inexpensive for, getting a number of prints that you can then frame. So yeah, I think that trying to keep things in rotation, try to frame them yourself. Once you frame them, you're much more likely to put them up.
Sure.
I've noticed that. Like I really occasionally I'll be like, I've got a collection of things I really need to take a weekend and just do framing, and then I will do that, and then they inevitably do end up on the walls if I do that.
Are there any of the sketches that you picked up that you think you'll end up framing, tearing out of the book, or do they just remain in the book?
I'm kind of trying to figure out what I want to do with those, because there are a couple of them in there that are a little bit more finished that I think would make really nice pieces on the wall. But I also kind of like the idea of keeping it as an intact sketchbook to page through. The one problem with having it as a sketchbook to page through is this is graphite, and graphite smudges. Even a page rubbing against another page is going to smudge it. So the more it gets handled, the more it's going to get smudged. So some of them, the nicer ones, if I do want to keep those much more, intact looking, I may want to frame them.
Now, in the collection that you have, that you picked up at the thrift store for $1, was there any religious art? Were there any churches? Were there any religious themes, or were they all basically secular based?
They're all New England landscapes, pretty much, other than a couple of scenes of cities with tugboats and stuff like that. So that since it is New England, there are a couple of churches, and there's one or two sketches that appear to be from visiting someplace like Arizona that have a mission church in them.
Oh,
But
really?
other than that, there's maybe one or two that show human figures in the distance, like skiing, and a few ones with animals that are almost all landscapes with no animals or people in them.
Yeah. Well, that's it's an incredible find. You never know what you're going to find at a thrift store. Um, just tell us a little bit. We've mentioned it a few times, the Catholic Home Gallery. If someone was to pick that up from Ignatius Press, what could they expect to find?
Well, in there, there are 18 works of art from 9 contemporary Catholic artists. This came about at work because I kept nagging people that I wanted to do it. And the reason I wanted to do it is I kept hearing people disparage the current Catholic art scene, and they would say there's no good Catholic art going on right now. It's all modernist stuff. It's all bad. Nobody does any good art anymore. And I just knew that wasn't true. I knew all about all these incredible artists that are out there, and so I'm hoping that this eventually does well enough that we can do a second volume, because there are still more. But just as a quick rundown, probably the best known artist in there is Michael D. O'Brien, who's also a novelist, who wrote Father Elijah. But I have a couple of his in there. Very, very striking depiction of the Assumption, which is one of my favorite works by him. And then there's an up and coming artist who's becoming more and more well known, named Gwyneth Thompson Briggs. And she's on Twitter, and she's really worth following because she does a lot of process pictures showing how she comes up with her compositions and stuff like that. Her incredible artist. And I included her paintings of Saint Benedict and Saint Scholastica in here. And then there's Bernadette Carstensen. She's another younger Catholic artist, and she did this marvelous picture of Our Lady Star of the Sea, which she made for Our Lady Star of the Sea Church in San Francisco, which is where I saw it first because I used to live in San Francisco. And so I included that one in here, and her Joseph Terror of Demons. Just to name a couple other ones here. Matthew Alderman, he works in black and white. I know you mentioned before we started recording that you love his depiction of Solanus Casey holding his miraculous ice cream cone. He also has a Wedding at Cana picture in here. And yeah, there's others in here. They're all great. One of my other personal favorites in here, just because he's a good friend of mine, is Tim Jones, and he did this Our Lady Queen of Heaven, as well as an Immaculate Heart. And he's a great guy. He's an art teacher at one of the Chesterton schools in Minnesota. And I've also used one of his paintings of G.K. Chesterton for a book cover before. But yeah, if you look this up, you're going to get these prints in there. The pages with the prints are perforated, so you can pull them out, and they're a standard 8x10 size, so they're easy to frame. And yeah, go at it. I've told people this makes a great like housewarming gift, or a marriage gift, or if you got anybody who wants to kind of start out a collection, and may not put all of them up in your house, but there's certainly, you're going to have some of these in here really speak to you.
For sure. Yeah, when it comes to Gwyneth that you mentioned, she just did an image of Our Lady of Champion, and I'm a priest in Green Bay, and so that is our Marian apparition site that she depicted there, and I know that was on display at the Eucharistic Congress as well in Indianapolis. And maybe just, I don't know if you're familiar with this artist. I commissioned her one time to do a print of Our Lady of the Snows, and she did this very beautiful image of Madonna with child, and then in Mary's hand, she was holding a church that was in my pastorate before that had closed, and so it was Our Lady of the Snows, and so it was Our Lady holding that church, and so her name is Kate Capato. I don't know
Oh
if
yeah,
you're familiar
I
with
know of
her,
her.
but yeah, so I've been impressed with her work as well.
Yeah. Like I
So
said, if we can do a second edition, there's plenty of other Catholic artists working out there right now. And so, yeah, before you complain about there's no good Catholic art happening right now, you got to look around online a little bit, see what you see.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, maybe just one last thing. There's a lot of controversy in the art world about this Rupnik who did all these mosaics that are in different places like Lourdes, France, or he's been accused of serial sexual misconduct. So, do you have any thoughts or takes on destroying his art, or what do you make of that?
Well, um, I I've talked a little bit about this before on social media. I think that especially given the environment of what we're living through right now in the church, it is flabbergasting to me that these have not been taken down. It is absolutely mind-boggling that we are still promoting his artwork and it's still appearing on Catholic websites and
Yeah.
in Catholic publications. It's would be the easiest thing to do just to stop sharing his images. But I think, someone probably needs to make that hard choice of, um, for the sake of people who are victims of this type of abuse, those images just need to go. And maybe somebody really feels strongly about saving them and wants to keep them in a private spot. Okay, but they do not need to be in public.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, it is mind boggling to me that out of all the Catholic artwork that exists, so even, you mentioned Michael O'Brien's Assumption, that on the Feast of Mary's Assumption, like that could have been an image that could have been used by different places, but instead they chose the Rupnik piece. So yeah, I totally agree with your take there. So, well, this has been a great conversation, all because you made a viral social media post about a sketchbook. And I want to talk about it more, but we were able to touch on so many different things. And if people want to see some of your artwork or learn more about you, do you have a website, or should they just follow you on social media?
They can follow me on social media. I tend to post more of my art related stuff on Instagram. And then also I have, as I mentioned before, a page called JR's Art Place on Facebook. And that is where I share art that I like. Occasionally I'll share my own art on there, but most of the time it's just art that I like. And I
Well,
also have
very
an
cool.
Etsy shop somewhere, somewhere out there where I have some of my linoleum prints.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, I'll try to find some of those links and be sure to post them in the show notes. And yeah, thanks so much, John, for sharing your time today, but sharing this story. And I hope maybe there'll be an update in the future that, you find out who the artist is.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Father.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. And don't forget to stay up to date with what Father Edward is doing by following him on Facebook, X, or Instagram at the handle @FREdwardLooney. Thanks for listening, and please join Father Edward again next time for another inspiring conversation.